The night split open the moment she screamed, as if the world itself had been waiting for her fear. Lyra stumbled through the auction yard, cold chains biting her wrists, trying to make herself smaller, while rough voices circled her like hungry shadows. She didn't know her tears carried power, didn't know the air trembled when they touched the dirt, but Ravian did. He felt it the moment he stepped into the torchlight, his gaze dragged toward her as if something ancient had grabbed his throat. He came to buy a bride to seal a treaty, nothing more, but the sight of her shaking shoulders made his chest twist in a way he couldn't name. When their eyes met, the wind shifted, pulling at his hair as if choosing sides, and for a single heartbeat he thought the darkness behind her moved. He told himself she was weakness he didn't need, a burden he couldn't afford. Yet his steps carried him to her anyway. And as the seller lifted her chin with a cruel hand, something sharp woke inside her, humming beneath her skin. A warning neither of them noticed until it was far too late. Lyra didn't speak a word as Ravian led her away from the yard, the chains removed, but the bruises still burning. She walked a few steps behind him, her breath thin and unsteady, while he pretended not to notice the quiet shivers running through her. The road stretched ahead in soft moonlight, lined with tall pines that whispered in the cold air. She kept wiping her cheeks, hoping the strange glow wouldn't return, hoping he hadn't seen it. Ravian kept his gaze forward, but every few moments his hand twitched toward the reins as if he wanted to say something and couldn't. He told himself she was just a duty, a promise he had to fulfill. Yet the memory of her trembling voice clung to him like smoke. As they walked deeper into the forest, a distant crack sounded, too sharp to be a branch, and Ravian shifted instantly into a guarded stance, while Lyra froze behind him, her fingers curling as something warm stirred in her chest. Again, the horse waited by a moss-covered stone, snorting softly as Ravian helped Lyra climb onto the saddle. She hesitated, unsure she was allowed to touch him, but he lifted her with careful hands that felt at odds with his stern face. She sat stiffly, her fingers gripping the leather, and he swung up behind her with a quiet exhale that warmed the back of her neck. The night carried a strange heaviness, as if watching them, as if expecting something. Every time the horse stepped forward, Lyra felt a faint pull under her ribs, a soft hum she didn't understand. Ravian tried to ignore the warmth of her pressed lightly against him, but it crawled up his spine and made his thoughts slow. They rode through silver shadows until a distant howl cut the air, low and warning, and Lyra's hands lit faintly for a heartbeat before fading again. They stopped by a quiet stream where mist curled low across the ground. Ravian handed her a water skin, and when her fingers brushed his, she flinched as a spark rushed through her hand. He froze too, staring at her as if the moment had struck him in the chest. Lyra turned away, kneeling near the stream to wash her face, but the water mirrored a faint glow around her eyes that made her heart pound. Ravian watched from a few steps away, unable to shake the sense that her fear was pulling at something in the air. She tried to steady her breathing, but tears pricked again, and the glow sharpened for a second before flickering out. Ravian stepped closer, his voice low, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head, but the truth pressed against her ribs. Something inside her was waking up. They reached a small clearing to rest, the fire crackling low while night deepened around them. Lyra sat wrapped in a thin blanket, her shoulders hunched, trying not to cry again. Ravian watched her from across the flames, fighting the urge to move closer. When her breath hitched, a tear slipped down her cheek, brightening slightly as it fell. Without thinking, he crossed the space between them and crouched beside her. She didn't look up, didn't see the way his expression softened, but she felt his hand touch her hair, slow and gentle, as if he feared she might break under his fingers. The glow in her tears pulsed once, warming the air. Ravian froze, caught between pulling away and touching her again. And in that fragile moment, Something in the night stirred, whispering that this was only the beginning. Thornhelm Keep rose from the mist like a sleeping beast, all dark stone and towering walls that seemed to judge every step Lyra took as she followed Ravian through the gate. She kept her hands clasped tight, afraid the strange warmth inside her would stir again. Ravian walked ahead with a steady stride, but she noticed how his shoulders tensed each time someone stared at her too long. Servants stepped aside, bowing to him, yet their eyes lingered on her with quiet questions she couldn't answer. When they entered the main hall, the fire roared high as if greeting them, and Lyra felt the air tighten around her ribs. Ravian glanced back, ready to explain something he didn't know how to say, but before he could speak, his aunt stepped forward with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Lyra lowered her gaze, hoping her magic wouldn't betray her. But deep inside, that soft hum began again, like waking breath. Mayura circled Lyra like someone inspecting a fragile vase, her expression unreadable while Ravian stood rigid beside them. Lyra tried to meet her gaze, but the pressure of the older woman's presence pushed her eyes down. Mayura asked quiet questions, her voice cool but not unkind, and Lyra answered in soft whispers that barely carried through the hall. Ravian watched closely, as if ready to step between them at the slightest sign of unease. When Mayura finally rested her hand on Lyra's shoulder, something inside Lyra flared, a tiny spark that warmed her skin. She gasped and stepped back, afraid the glow would show again. Ravian moved instantly, asking what happened, but she shook her head, unable to explain. Miral narrowed her eyes, studying Lyra with new interest, and the air shifted as if the keep itself leaned closer. Ravian led Lyra to her new room, a small chamber warmed by a single lantern. She lingered by the window, staring at the moonlit courtyard below, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. He stood by the door, unsure whether to stay or speak, torn between duty and the strange pull he felt whenever she looked fragile. She whispered that she didn't belong here, and the words hit him harder than he expected. He stepped closer, saying she was safe now, but the promise sounded fragile even to him. Her breath caught as another faint hum rose under her ribs, warming the air around them. Ravian noticed her shiver and reached out to touch her arm before stopping himself, hands suspended in the space between them. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something silent and dangerous filled the room. Later that night, Lyra wandered into the courtyard, needing air to quiet the buzzing under her skin. The moon hung low, painting the stone walls silver, and for a moment she felt almost calm. But then a shadow flickered near the archway, too quick to be a torch, too heavy to be the wind. Lyra froze, sensing eyes on her even though the yard looked empty. The hum in her chest sharpened, pushing upward toward her throat. Ravian appeared a heartbeat later, sword in hand, as if he had felt the same shift. He scanned the darkness, then stepped in front of her without hesitation. Lyra watched the way his body angled to shield her, the way his breath steadied, even as danger whispered from the corners. She whispered that something was here, and his jaw tightened as if he had feared exactly that. They returned inside, but the tension stayed with them like a ghost. Ravian lit a lantern in her room, the flame steady and warm, and told her she wasn't to wander alone at night. Lyra nodded, though her heart kept pounding from the unseen presence she felt outside. When she sat on the bed, her thoughts tangled, and a tear slid down her cheek, brightening softly before fading. Ravian saw it. He moved closer without thinking, his voice softened by worry he couldn't hide. She whispered that she didn't know what was happening to her, that something inside her felt wrong. Ravian knelt beside her, the firelight brushing his face, and for the first time he reached for her hand instead of her hair. Her pulse jumped, and the air warmed between their palms. Something in the keep creaked, as if the walls themselves sensed what was forming between them. Lyra woke with her heart pounding, her breath unsteady as a strange heat moved under her skin. The room felt too small, the air too thick, and the faint hum she had tried to ignore for days now pushed like a rising wave. She stepped toward the window, gripping the stone frame as moonlight brushed her shaking hands. The glow seeped through her fingers before she could stop it. Ravian burst into the room a moment later, sword drawn as if something had dragged him from sleep. His eyes widened when he saw the light spilling from her palms, soft but sharp like trapped fire. Lyra whispered that she didn't mean to do it, her voice thin with panic. Ravian sheathed his blade slowly, his steps careful, as if approaching a frightened animal. He told her to breathe, to stay with him. But the magic surged again, and for a moment the room trembled, shifting the air between them like a held breath. Ravian guided her to sit on the edge of the bed, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. Lyra tried to explain the warmth inside her, the way it rose when she felt too much. But every word made her throat tighten. Ravian listened, his brows drawn, torn between fear for her and fear of what this power might bring to his lands. When her breath quickened, the glow around her fingers brightened again, rising like sparks pulled from a flame. She pressed her hands against her chest, whispering that she didn't want to hurt anyone. Ravian knelt in front of her, placing his hand over hers without hesitation. The glow dimmed instantly, shrinking beneath his touch as if recognizing him. Lyra stared at their joined hands, shaken by how safe he felt. Ravian stared too, caught off guard by the warmth that settled into his skin. When dawn broke, Mira entered the room with a firm step, summoned by Ravian before Lyra woke again. The older woman took one look at Lyra's exhausted face, and the rumpled sheet still holding traces of glow, and her expression sharpened with understanding. Mira asked Lyra to show her the magic, but Lyra flinched, saying she couldn't control it. Ravian stood behind her, arms crossed, watching every breath. Mireia explained an old legend, one whispered through Thornhelm bloodlines. A girl whose tears awakened forgotten power, whose heart could bend shadows or burn them away. Lyra shook her head, overwhelmed, insisting she wasn't anyone special. But Mira stepped closer, lifting Lyra's chin with surprising gentleness, and said the truth didn't wait for permission. The room stilled, as if accepting the beginning of something long overdue. Mira led them to the old prayer hall, a quiet chamber covered in faded carvings that whispered of ancient queens. Lyra stepped inside slowly, feeling the weight of the place settle over her skin. Ravian remained close behind, silent but steady, as if ready to catch her should the magic push too far. Mirera instructed Lyra to breathe and let the feeling rise, not fight it. Lyra closed her eyes, her breath shaky as warmth bloomed in her chest again. Light gathered at her fingertips, stronger than before, swirling in soft rings. Ravian stepped forward instinctively, but Mira held out a hand to stop him. Lyra tried to focus, but a sudden rush of fear broke her control, and the light burst outward, rattling the wooden beams. Ravian grabbed her shoulders, steadying her before she collapsed. Her magic dimmed instantly under his touch, fading like a frightened heartbeat. As the last echo faded, a cold wind slipped through the hall, carrying whispers that didn't belong to any living voice. Lyra stiffened, feeling the shadows shift near the far wall. Ravian turned instantly, drawing his sword as a shape pulled itself from the darkness, tall and twisted with trembling edges like living smoke. Lyra's breath hitched as her magic surged again in response to its presence. Mira whispered a name she hoped never to speak. The Shade King's Herald. The creature took one slow step forward, its hollow gaze fixed on Lyra. Ravian moved to block it, his stance wide and unyielding. Lyra grabbed his arm, fear and heat tangling in her chest, and her touch sent a wave of light through the room. The herald recoiled, shrinking back into the wall, leaving only silence behind. Ravian looked at Lyra in stunned realization. Her power didn't just awaken, it warned. Lyra stayed close to Ravian as they left the prayer hall, her breath still uneven from the burst of power she couldn't control. Ravian walked beside her with a new tension in his stride, as if the shadow creature had carved a warning into his bones. When they reached the training yard, he stopped and turned to face her, saying she needed to learn how to defend herself. Not from him, not from the keep, but from whatever hunted her. Lyra swallowed hard, unsure if she could trust her own hands, yet his voice steadied something inside her. He stepped behind her, guiding her fingers to hold a wooden staff, the warmth of his touch sliding across her knuckles. Her heart stumbled, and the faint hum rose again, curling around his presence like it recognized him. Ravian pretended not to notice, though the flare of glow caught in the corner of his eye. The wind shifted, carrying a silent promise that this was no longer protection, it was connection. Hours later, after countless attempts at balance and form, Lyra's arms trembled with effort. Ravian circled her slowly, correcting her stance with light touches that sent warmth up her spine. She felt the magic stirring every time he came close, as if pulled toward his steadiness. When she lost her footing and nearly fell, he caught her by the waist, pulling her against him with reflexive strength. Her breath stopped. His did too. For a moment, the world narrowed to the way his arm wrapped around her, and the soft glow rising at her throat. She whispered an apology, but Ravian shook his head, saying she did well. He set her upright gently, his fingers lingering an instant longer than they should. Lyra's magic pulsed, warm and bright as if marking the shape of his touch. She turned away, cheeks warm, whispering that she needed a break before her heart betrayed her again. That evening, rain misted through the courtyard as Lyra slipped into the old library, seeking silence. Rows of tall shelves wrapped her in the scent of dust and forgotten stories. She traced her fingers along a carved emblem, feeling the faint pulse of old magic beneath it, when she whispered Ravian's name under her breath, unsure why it lingered in her mind. The emblem gave a soft glow in reply. Startled, she stepped back as a page fell from the shelf, drifting to the floor at her feet. It held the image of a girl with glowing tears and a man standing behind her like a shield of shadow and steel. Lyra felt her chest tighten as she read the faded script about a bond formed before crowns and prophecy. Ravian entered quietly behind her, rain dripping from his armor, and found her holding the page. Their eyes met in the stillness, and neither spoke, the fear rising between them. Ravian moved closer, lifting the page gently from her fingers. As their hands brushed, the magic rose again, brighter this time, warming the air. He read the lines slowly, his expression tightening with each word. When he realized the prophecy spoke of a girl whose tears could awaken or destroy kingdoms, he looked up at Lyra, as if seeing her fully for the first time. She backed away, breath trembling, insisting she wasn't the girl in those stories. Ravian followed, steps careful, voice low and steady. He told her that prophecy didn't decide her worth or her future. She whispered that she was afraid of hurting him most of all. Ravian stopped inches from her, storm-gray eyes shadowed with something deeper than fear. He said he wasn't afraid of her. The glow between them pulsed once, soft and warm, binding the silence like a promise neither dared name. Later that night, Lyra returned to the courtyard to clear her mind, but the storm clouds overhead gathered too fast, swirling into unnatural shapes. She felt the wrongness before she saw the figure stepping through the rain. Derek Stormborn, smug and dangerous, his eyes fixed on her with unsettling hunger. Ravian arrived a breath later, sword drawn, placing himself between them without hesitation. Derek smiled, saying she carried something powerful and fragile, something wasted at Thornhelm. Lyra felt the magic tug at her ribs again, rising in fear. Ravian warned Derek to leave, but Derek stepped closer, claiming she belonged with those who understood her worth. The rain thickened, the air tightening, and Lyra grabbed Ravian's arm as light flickered across her skin. Ravian tightened his grip on his sword, jaw clenched. Derek's smile widened. Lyra felt the storm answering her heartbeat, and for the first time, her power didn't tremble. it reached. The storm tore across the courtyard as if the sky itself sensed what Derek had awakened. Revienne pulled Lyra behind him, his grip steady, even as thunder cracked above the walls. Lyra's heart raced, her power stirring with each breath she took, rising in pulses that lit the rain around her like drifting sparks. Derek watched with a hungry smile, claiming the shadows obeyed her kind, that the world outside Thornhelm would bow at her feet. Revienne growled a warning, stepping closer, his stance wide and unyielding. But Lyra felt the danger before she saw it. A dark tear in the air behind Derek splitting open, leaking a cold that crawled along her skin. The Shade King's presence pressed through like a silent scream. Lyra grabbed Revienne's arm as the glow surged stronger than it ever had, and the storm bent toward her as if answering her fear. Revienne looked back at her, shock and awe tangled in his eyes. The tear widened and spilled a creature of twisting shadow into the courtyard, its movements jagged like broken wind. Lyra felt the hum inside her leap to a painful intensity, pulling at her ribs until she could barely breathe. Revienne shouted her name, but she could only stare as the creature lunged toward him. Instinct overpowered fear, and the glow burst from her chest, flooding outward in a wave of soft gold. Revienne swung his sword, but the light reached the creature first, slamming into it with a force that cracked the air. Derek's smile vanished, replaced by rage as the beast dissolved into sparks. Lyra stumbled, overwhelmed, and Revienne caught her around the waist just before she collapsed. His voice trembled as he whispered that she saved him. Lyra met his eyes, breath shaking, and realized the glow softened only when he held her. The storm calmed for a heartbeat, as if waiting for her next breath. Revienne lifted Lyra into his arms without waiting for permission, carrying her inside as the rain hammered the stones behind them. She clung to his shoulders, dizzy from the blast of magic, her breath unsteady as the glow flickered under her skin. When they reached the hall, guards rushed forward, but Revienne barked for space, his voice carrying a sharp edge no one dared challenge. He lowered Lyra onto a bench near the fire, brushing wet strands of hair from her face with careful fingers that trembled ever so slightly. She whispered that she didn't know how she did it. Revienne knelt before her, saying it didn't matter. She was safe, and she kept him alive. She felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, steadying the hum of magic. For the first time since arriving at Thornhelm, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt necessary, but peace didn't last. Moments later, a messenger stumbled through the hall, soaked and shaking, claiming the border wards were failing and shadow creatures roamed the outer fields. Revienne stood instantly, tension snapping through him as if old wounds tore open. Lyra rose, too, legs unsteady but determined, insisting she could help. Revienne turned on her, fear sharp in his eyes, saying he wouldn't risk her life again. The words cut deeper than he meant, and Lyra stepped back, her glow dimming in hurt. Mira entered then, reading the room with one sweeping look, and said the kingdom would demand answers once word of Lyra's power reached them. Revienne cursed under his breath, knowing she was right. Lyra realized then that the world outside the keep was already changing because of her, and somewhere beyond the storm, the Shade King waited for her next move. The council arrived before dawn, summoned by Revienne's urgent call, filling the war room with sharp voices and the smell of cold armor. Lyra stood at Revienne's side, wrapped in a cloak too large for her, her fingers twisting nervously. Derek arrived last, his expression smooth, but his eyes burning with unspoken threat. He accused Revienne of hiding a weapon that should belong to the realm, not one man. Lyra felt her stomach twist as murmurs rose. Revienne slammed his hand on the table, claiming she was his wife and under his protection. The room fell silent. Lyra stared up at him, shocked by the fierceness in his voice. When Derek stepped toward her, the glow ignited again, bright and protective, and the walls responded with a low, rumbling pulse. Revienne moved instantly, placing his body between hers and every accusing gaze. In that moment, the room understood. They were no longer a forced match. They were a bond, and breaking them would start a war. Lyra couldn't sleep after the council meeting. Her mind spun with fear and questions she didn't know how to ask. When she slipped into the old library before dawn, the carvings on the walls seemed to shift in the dim light, guiding her deeper. She followed the faint pulse beneath her ribs until she found a narrow archway she hadn't seen before. Inside, an ancient mural stretched across the stone, showing a line of women with glowing tears and crowns made of light. Her breath caught as she saw her own face reflected back in those painted queens. She reached out, fingers shaking, and the mural reacted with a soft shimmer that climbed her arm. Ravian entered quietly behind her, breath heavy from searching for her. When he saw the mural, he froze, understanding settling slowly into his eyes. Lyra whispered that she wasn't just a mistake of magic. She was a lineage the world feared. Ravian stepped forward and took her trembling hand, anchoring her to something real. The mural glowed brighter, as if agreeing. Ravian guided her back to the hall, his fingers still wrapped around hers as if he feared losing her to the power awakening inside her. Lyra's steps were uneven, the new truth weighing heavy on her shoulders. He led her to a quiet chamber and closed the door behind them, his breath unsteady as he tried to find the right words. She told him she didn't want to be feared, didn't want to become a symbol for others to use. Ravian stepped closer, saying she wasn't a weapon. She was a person, and she was his. The words slipped out before he could take it back. Lyra's heart stilled, her glow softening like warm breath. She whispered that she didn't want him to protect her out of duty. Ravian lifted her chin, his voice low, telling her duty had nothing to do with what he felt now. The glow shivered across her skin, gentle and alive. The moment stretched between them like a held breath. Lyra's glow rose in warm pulses, brushing against Ravian's chest like a heartbeat reaching for his. She whispered his name, unsure whether she meant it as a plea or an answer. And he stepped closer, closing the distance until she felt the heat of him completely. His hand slid to her waist, steady but unsure, as if he still fought the urge to pull her into him. Lyra lifted her hand to his jaw, her fingers tracing the scar she had once feared. Ravian inhaled sharply, leaning into her touch like it unraveled something tightly locked inside him. Their foreheads touched, soft and trembling, and the glow enveloped them in a gentle halo. Lyra felt her fear melt away, replaced by something quiet and powerful. Ravian whispered that he wanted her, not because of magic or prophecy, but because she had become the one thing he couldn't walk away from. Her power softened, wrapping around them like a promise, their calm shattered with a scream echoing from the courtyard. Ravian rushed out with Lyra close behind, both hearts still tangled from the moment they'd nearly given into. When they stepped outside, guards were struggling against shadow creatures spilling through a crack in the warded wall. Lyra's glow rose instantly, hot enough to sting her palms. Ravian barked orders, cutting down the nearest creature as Lyra lifted her hands. The light burst forward, bright and alive, sweeping across the courtyard and burning through the shadows. But as the creatures vanished, Lyra felt a sharp pull inside her chest. Someone inside the keep was using her power. She staggered, gripping Ravian's arm. Mira ran toward them, shouting that a traitor had tampered with the inner wards. Lyra's vision blurred with shock. Someone close had betrayed them. The glow around her flickered, turning sharp like cracked glass. Before Ravian could react, armored figures burst through the corridor, knocking him back with a blow that sent him to one knee. Lyra cried out, the glow rising violently, but hands grabbed her from behind. Cold, strong, and merciless. Derek stepped forward from the group, his blue eyes bright with triumph as he ordered the soldiers to take Ravian. Lyra fought against the grip on her arms, light flaring wildly, but the traitor in the keep had placed dampening sigils around her wrists. The glow sputtered, dimming painfully. Ravian roared her name, struggling against the blades held to his throat, as Derek declared her power belonged to the realm, not to a lovesick ward. Lyra's heart shattered as Ravian was dragged away, his eyes locked on hers with desperate fear. She reached out, fingers trembling, but the sigils burned cold. For the first time, her glow extinguished completely. The world felt empty without it. The dungeon stank of iron and old fear, but Lyra barely felt it as she tore down the stairwell, her wrists still burning from the dampening sigils she'd ripped off with sheer desperation. Her glow sparked weakly, flickering like a wounded flame. She followed the pull in her chest, the one that always led her to Ravian, until she reached a heavy barred door. His voice, rough with pain, answered her trembling whisper. She pushed her hands against the iron, her magic straining to rise, driven by fear stronger than any she'd ever felt. Light leaked through her fingers, soft but growing. Ravian shouted for her to run, but she refused. She told him she wasn't losing him, not when the world wanted her to break. The glow burst forward, shattering the lock in a flash that shook the stones. Ravian stumbled toward her, stunned, and she caught him before he fell. The light around her steadied, warm and powerful, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Ravian leaned heavily on her as they moved through the dark hallway, but his grip on her waist was still protective, even wounded. Lyra whispered that she should have stayed by his side, but he shook his head sharply, telling her she had nothing to apologize for. The shadows around them twisted, drawn to her revived magic, and the air thickened with the Shade King's presence. Lyra felt a cold pressure at the base of her spine, a silent command pulling her toward the outer courtyard. Ravian tightened his arm around her, refusing to let the shadows claim her. She pressed her glowing palm to his chest, promising she wouldn't run, wouldn't break, not now that she understood what her power truly wanted. Ravian cupped her face gently, telling her he trusted her more than the prophecy ever could. The glow warmed his skin, sinking into him like a vow. They stepped into the broken courtyard where the sky churned with unnatural darkness. Derek waited at the center, cloak billowing, surrounded by soldiers who had turned against their oath. Behind him, the Shade King's form swelled like a storm given shape, towering and silent with hollow eyes fixed on Lyra. Her glow rose instantly, stronger than before, rushing up her arms and across her chest. Derek shouted that her destiny was to belong to Shadow, to take her place beside the ancient king. Lyra shook her head, tears glowing on her cheeks as she said she chose her own future. Ravian stepped beside her, sword raised despite his wounds. She reached for him, fingers brushing his, and the glow wrapped around them both. The Shade King recoiled, sensing something new, something neither shadow nor prophecy could command. The courtyard trembled as Lyra lifted her chin, no longer afraid of what lived inside her. The Shade King surged forward, its hollow gaze stretching the air as shadows lashed toward Lyra. She lifted her hands, letting the light flood from her without fear for the first time. The glow burst outward in a radiant wave that collided with the darkness, sending sparks of gold and black spiraling into the storm. Ravian fought beside her, cutting down any soldier who dared approach, his every movement fueled by the need to keep her safe. Lyra's power swelled each time she looked at him, as if his presence anchored the magic instead of overwhelming it. The Shade King screamed without sound, its form weakening as the glow pierced through its core. Lyra felt the ancient pull again, the one that once demanded obedience, but this time she pushed back, unleashing everything inside her. The courtyard filled with blinding gold, and the darkness shattered like brittle stone. When the light finally dimmed, the courtyard lay silent except for the soft patter of dying rain. The Shade King was gone, its last traces curling away like smoke in the wind. The soldiers who betrayed them dropped their weapons, staring at Lyra with stunned fear. Ravian turned to her, chest rising heavily, and cupped her face with trembling hands. Lyra leaned into him, the remnants of her glow shimmering softly across his skin. She whispered that she was afraid he'd never come back to her, and he pressed his forehead to hers, promising he would always find her, no matter who tried to take her away. The warmth between them grew, steady and certain, as if their hearts had found the rhythm they'd been fighting for since the night he bought her. Lyra took his hand, lifting it to her cheek, and felt her magic settle. Not wild, not broken. Home.